Stories are dangerous. As a book publisher, you probably wouldn't expect me to say something like that. But what if I were to tell you the truth about myself, the ugly truth? What if I share stories with you that I know are socially unacceptable? What will you think of me? What if I share the story that I'm a victim of abuse and rape? Or the story that I was a single mom of 2 babies by the age of 21? Or even the story about the years I was a closet drug addict? It doesn't feel safe for me to share my stories, especially the stories that made me feel so bad about myself. Because if I share these stories with you, you won't think much of me. And you certainly won't see me the way I want you to. For me, stories literally were dangerous. From the time I was a little girl, I have always been, well, let's just say feisty. You know the type, little Miss Sassafras. I was not afraid to speak up and be heard, but I was rarely given the opportunity. Story. I was 12 years old, and as I lied in bed crying, curled up in the fetal position, my body throbbing in pain, I had just experienced the worst beating of my life from my father. It wasn't the first time it had happened, but it was definitely the worst. My dad promised. He promised he would let me explain. He promised he would let me tell my side of the story this time. He didn't. Suddenly, I could hear the echo of his voice saying throughout my childhood, "Children are to be seen and not heard." Instead, between the tears streaming down my face and my frantic pleas to be heard, the pain of each blow from his tightly clenched fists silenced me. I felt so hurt, so angry, and betrayed. So in that moment, I vowed to myself that would be the very last beating. And it was. At least by the hands of my father. You see, as it turned out, I would experience many more abusive relationships in my adult life. A controlling, manipulative first marriage filled with verbal abuse and infidelity. Beaten and raped at knife point by a boyfriend. Mental and emotional torment in my second marriage. And a secret drug addiction to hide all of the agony, fear, and the deep-seated shame. These were the dangerous stories because I thought they defined my identity, my role in the world, because without them, I would lose all sense of who I was. I clung to my stories like a life preserver in the open sea. Even though the stories I was living were painful and destructive. Without them, I would lose all sense of who I was. Stories are powerful, and they define our identity. The story of the abused drug addict, it didn't fit with who I knew I really was. I had to make sense of that somehow. So in order to let go of that narrative, I had to dig deep. But the opportunity always came hard. At the age of 23, I was forced to sit naked, battered and bruised, on a bathtub while my boyfriend showered off remnants of the disgusting acts of violence he forced me to endure. The only thought racing through my mind was, where are my car keys? I have got to find a way out of here or I could die. I had been punched, bitten, thrown against walls, choked, and raped. At one point, he had pinned me to the top of my kitchen table while his raised hand held a butcher knife pointed toward my face. As his arm came down, I frantically wrestled away, and the knife pierced through a stack of paperback books lying right next to my head. As I sat on the tub, I knew I was in serious danger. The bathroom door was locked and barricaded. But as he was rinsing the shampoo out of his hair, I seized the moment. Please, God, let me find my purse by the front door. As I ran and grabbed my coat, fumbled for the keys in my purse, which was, thank God, exactly where I'd hoped I'd left it, and bolted for my car. The scene that followed felt like a bad horror film in slow motion. As I was running, I look behind me and find that he's running after me, dripping wet and naked. My heart was pounding out of my chest. As I quickly sped away, he had lunged for the back bumper of my car. Talk about defining moments. That single experience would bring a lot of clarity to the very dark turn my life had taken. The sheer will to survive, combined with a sobering rush of adrenaline, changed my world that day. At that point, I changed my story. Until my life was on the line, I actually didn't know that I could. But that's how powerful stories can be. The story about the abused drug addict just was not going to fit. It wasn't who I really, really was. So I turned my life around. I went back to college and received my design degree. I got a great job working for a municipality with full benefits. I was building a 401k. My kids were happy and thriving in school. Life was good. I was living it on my terms. But then it happened. Again. You see, the old story is so seductive. Because what I didn't realize when I made that promise to myself was the fact that I was still so susceptible to the narrative of emotional and mental abuse. And so as I went forward with my life and into my next relationship several years later, it's exactly what I walked into. But this one was different. Oh, yes. It was so full of promise. We were introduced by mutual friends. He was generous, kind, and loving, said all the right things. He promised me and my kids a life we'd never known before. It was the fairy tale relationship I had always dreamed about. He proposed. I said yes. Within weeks, we were married in a beautiful church wedding surrounded by loved ones. I resigned from that great paying job I loved, moved my kids to our new home back east, where he had recently received a job transfer, settled into our new life, far away from family and friends. I noticed things started to shift. He became distant, cold-hearted, and lacked emotion. On a freezing winter day, I came home to an empty house with an eviction notice on the door and no electricity. He had taken everything and closed my bank account, our bank account, including my 401k funds he convinced me to cash out. It didn't take long for me to realize that I had been the target of an elaborate and very calculated scheme created by the mastermind of a sociopath. I was shocked and humiliated. I felt broken and utterly defeated. Not to mention the guilt I harbored for the confusing and emotionally damaging experience my children were put through. So what happened? Didn't I change my story? Well, I did and I didn't. You see, the story that I had crafted so carefully along the years, the ones where shame and blame were my compadres, my trusty sidekicks who made sure I failed every time. That was the story I had to change. But how? Well, what happens when you tell your story? You take responsibility for it. And when you take responsibility for your story, you find the freedom to live in it. The story that I had crafted was a painful one. And it took me years to figure out how to change it. But as I moved forward in my life and figured out what I needed to do, I learned to connect to that heart-centered place from within. Not from a place full of anger or resentment, but from a place of unconditional love and forgiveness. Forgiveness of myself, and yes, even my father. not only was it important for me to learn how to tell the true story about myself to myself, I quickly discovered that others needed to hear it too. And when I finally gained the confidence to put a stop to the abuse, to stand up, speak up, share my story, and be heard, that's when it became important. When you find the strength to tell your story, no matter how painful, no matter how dangerous, that is when you truly become free. Because your story might still be your challenge, as it is mine, but it can also be someone else's inspiration. So I want you to think about your story, your internal narratives, the stories no one is supposed to hear, as your legacy. Because being a book publisher has given me the journey, has allowed me the journey to give women the opportunity to tell their stories, to share their journey. Because their story, your story, has the power to impact others in a way that can transform lives, even leave a legacy. You don't have to write a book. You just deserve to be heard. Write it, tell it, talk about it. Put your message in a bottle and throw it in the ocean. Just share it. Will you stay a victim? Will you remain silent with your fear, your guilt, or shame? Will you allow your story to be dangerous? Or will you become the voice of inspiration and change? Which story will you tell? Thank you.